Hey folks, welcome to Ed's Garage, my actual garage. So today on Ed's Garage, we're going to be just doing an oil change on this 2007 Hummer H3. An oil change is pretty easy, honestly, and maybe it can save you a little bit of money if you learn how to do it on your own. The good thing about using or doing an oil change on your own is you can choose which oil you want to use and which filter you want to use. At a dealership, chances are you're going to spend a bit of a premium on full synthetic oil. Generally, the filters they use are pretty good, but at a quickie lube place, usually you're going to get pretty cheap oil, conventional oil for the most part, unless you specifically request full synthetic or semi-synthetic. And the filters they use, honestly, are always garbage. So get a good filter, get some good synthetic oil, do your own oil change. It's really not that hard. I'm going to show you how to do that today. 5W30 full synthetic. Now the type of oil that your vehicle takes usually is listed on the cap, so I'm going to show you where that is. If it's not on the cap in the engine bay, then you'll want to check in your manual. Generally you'll be able to find it there. Usually a quick Google search, you can find it pretty easily as well. Now I'm using this filter right here. This is an AC Delco filter. AC Delco makes a lot of parts for General Motors and other companies. So this is essentially an OEM replacement filter, and the reason I like these is because they actually have a steel core, which is tough to show you on camera, but essentially inside here there's a steel core instead of a cardboard core, which can essentially fall apart after a while. Actually, there you can see the inside, it's all steel. So these are a really good filter, but there's other good companies as well, like Bosch makes a good filter, Pennzoil makes a good filter. I wouldn't get anything made by Fram as an example. Those are kind of cheap, but this is good stuff. Alright, so looking under the hood of my Hummer H3, basically what we're looking for is a large black cap, not to be mistaken with the coolant reservoir cap or the radiator cap. You'll know the difference usually because it'll just tell you that it's 5W30, but essentially, or 10W30 or whatever. But essentially, you'll often see this logo here, which is the logo for engine oil. Something like the radiator cap will tell you to never open it when hot. The oil will never say that. So it's a pretty good indicator that the oil cap is going to be right there. Other caps in here are going to be like windshield washer fluid, radiator coolant reservoir fluid, and on the right hand side of the engine, or driver's side, you're going to see your brake fluid cap on a reservoir similar to that, and it's almost always in that corner there. Alright, so let's check out the oil condition. So this is our dipstick for the oil right here. Alright, so there it is, and you can see it's actually quite low. Now how much oil is in here right now really doesn't matter too much, but I am curious. Alright, so let's have another look here. Okay, so yeah, it is pretty low. It's just on the end of the dipstick, and it's actually below the fill line, way below the full line. So the one on the left is the fill, one on the right is the full. It should be somewhere in here. Now this truck does burn a little bit of oil. It's got a lot of mileage on it, and that's not unusual for a higher mileage vehicle. But you can see it's just sort of on the tip of the dipstick. Now that doesn't mean that it's that empty. The dipstick actually only represents roughly the last liter or two, or quart or two of oil. So while it is low, it's not a huge amount low. It's not really a big deal. If your dipstick was dry, then you should be worried. And of course, if it's that low, you should definitely be adding oil as well. For now, I'm just going to take the cap off, and that'll allow some pressure or some airflow in there to allow the oil to drain out a little bit quicker. And next is to put an oil pan underneath and pull out the plug. There's my drain plug right there. This is the driver's side over here, and it's kind of pointing towards the driver's side. I need to get this out of the way. Alright, so the drain plug on this Hummer H3 happens to be a 13mm. So I'm going to get my socket wrench on there in a second, start releasing that. So anytime you're doing an oil change on a vehicle, keep in mind that there's going to be potentially another drain plug underneath here for the transmission. So obviously you don't want to make the mistake of taking out the transmission plug. This one's pretty obvious. This oil pan is basically right dead center of the vehicle, below the engine. It's also here at the lowest point, is where you'll find the bolt to take out. Now, the transmission on this vehicle is that away, so I don't have to worry about accidentally taking out that drain plug because it's actually way back there. On a transverse mounted engine, so where the engine is mounted sideways, you'll have the drain plug usually more sort of towards the passenger side, and then sometimes there'll be a drain plug around here underneath the transmission, because in a transverse mounted system, the transmission is actually on the driver's side and the engine's on the passenger side, or at least, you know, relative speaking. So I'm going to take this one out. GM in their infinite wisdom put it right above this cross member here, which kind of sucks. It means everything's going to get kind of messy. So what I'm going to try to do is put some cardboard behind there to direct the oil into the pan. All right, so I found some actually corrugated plastic, which is essentially the same sort of thing as cardboard, but made of plastic. So that means I'll be able to reuse it again in the future, which is kind of a nice benefit. Oh, my socket wrench is falling apart. That's awesome. All right, so one thing I'd recommend is definitely have a rag nearby, because chances are this is going to be messy. Try to come in from the top of the plug so that you don't get oil all over your hands as you pull it out. There we go. That actually turned out quite nice. All right. Then you're going to want to inspect the seal on the plug. Mine actually has a rubber seal in it, and it looks really good, so I don't need to replace that. That's nice. All right, so while you're waiting for the oil to drain, it's probably not a bad idea to take that few minutes and have a look at some of the other fluids in your vehicle. Now, obviously, you are doing the oil, so we can ignore that for a moment. If you've just run the engine, you don't want to open up the coolant cap, for obvious reasons, because the pressure buildup will cause it to spray out. And getting coolant on the ground is not great because, you know, environment and all that. But getting boiling hot coolant all over you is even less cool. So mine's still cold, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the coolant or the radiator cap and have a look, and it looks good. So I've got the coolant right up basically to the top here. The condition looks good. I don't see any floaties in there. These vehicles use Dexcool, which is orange, and that color looks just fine. Next thing I'm going to do here is check the reservoir. So on this vehicle, there is a coolant reservoir, which is right here. Now the coolant looks low, but it's actually perfectly fine. So when it's cold, that's when it should be at this line. All right, so just so you can see what I'm looking at, here's our coolant reservoir, and it says full cold, this line. So we're pretty much right there. It's good, don't really need to add anything else. All right, next thing I'm going to check is my brake fluid. So first off, before I open that cap, I want to clean off everything around it. The last thing you want to do is get sand or, you know, any sort of debris inside of the brake fluid reservoir, because that can actually clog up your brake lines and lead to brake failure. So very, very careful with that. Make sure that you keep that really clean. All right, let's open that up and have a look. Okay, and like the coolant, I can see the fluid is at the right level. It's just below the filler neck here. But now I want to quickly check the condition of that brake fluid. And the way to do that, I mean, there's a proper way and an improper way. I'm going to do it the improper way because I don't have access to the tool that I need to do it the proper way, but this will give you a good indication as well. So I've got a nice clean piece of paper towel here. I'm just going to dip it in there a little bit. And I'm going to have a look at the color. Now, the color of brake fluid is actually clear. When it's turning yellow like this, that means that it's basically started to absorb some oxygen out of the water that's gone into it. So essentially, it's oxidizing. So after a long period of time, any moisture buildup inside of here, water buildup, will essentially mix with the engine, or with the engine oil, with the brake fluid, and turn it yellow. So this is not bad, but I should probably get it properly tested, as it is yellow. Now, for the record, yellow brake fluid still works. You'll still be able to stop, but it does require a little bit more pressure on the brake. Hydraulic fluid is very highly incompressible, and anytime it starts to yellow like that, it becomes slightly more compressible, which means you have to push the brake a little harder for the same force. So the darker it is, the worse it is. It should be nearly clear, maybe a hint of yellow. This is getting there. I'll probably do a brake fluid flush maybe in another 5,000 to 10,000 kilometers. So it's getting there, but it's not terrible yet. Now, the last thing I could check, but not right now, is the transmission fluid. The reason I say not right now is because in order to check transmission fluid, the engine actually has to be running. Obviously, it's got no oil in it right now, so I can't have it running. To check the transmission fluid properly, you run the vehicle until it's warm, until it's basically reached operating temperature. You run it through each one of the gears, so you put it into drive for 3 seconds, third, second, first, reverse, neutral. Run it like that in each one of those selections for about 3 seconds or so, put it back into park, and leave the engine running. Then you come to this dipstick and you check to see that the fluid level is within the hot section. So there'll be usually a hot and a cold section on that dipstick. So you look at hot, you make sure the fluid level is within the appropriate amount, and that's all you got to do. If it's low, you actually add to it at the filler neck, because there's not going to be a proper spot to fill the transmission. If you don't have a filler neck or an inspection neck like this one, that's because you have a sealed unit. So newer vehicles, newer transmissions, they don't generally have a dipstick, and those have to be checked a little bit more complicatedly. You actually have to pull a plug and stick your finger in there and see if the fluid level is at that plug. If you're unfamiliar with that, or not sure exactly if you want to do it, when in doubt, take it to a service shop to have that done. That obviously has a steering wheel on it, so pretty obvious that it's power steering. Now this one, again, you need to keep it very, very clean, so make sure you clean around the outside before taking the cap off. And you can see here, we have a dipstick very similar to the oil dipstick, but a lot smaller. So we're going to dry that off on some clean rag or tissue or whatever. Put it back in all the way. This one actually needs to be screwed on. It's the fill hole as well. And have a look. So this is also a little bit low, so I'm going to need to add a little bit of fluid there. You can see it's just on the bottom line of the accurate amount, and that's probably why my power steering makes a little bit of noise. So let's add some power steering fluid. All right, when using a funnel, make sure the funnel is very clean. You do not want to use a dirty funnel for obvious reasons. Now, power steering fluid reservoir is quite small, so add a little bit and check. All right, so it's actually a little bit too full, but that's okay. A little bit over the line, not a big deal. Okay, so the oil is pretty much done draining out of the truck engine. However, I need to take off the oil filter. So now I got to figure out where that is, because I can't actually remember it. And I think it's underneath this skid plate this time. All right, so the filter on the Hummer H3 is located on the passenger side, kind of above this cross member here. And it's a bit of a doozy to get to, but it should only be hand tightened. You shouldn't have to use a wrench or anything like that to pull it off. So here goes. Now, first I'm going to actually take this out, and I'm going to put the plug in the hole, making sure to keep it clean. All right, if the oil filter is too tight, you need one of these. This is an oil filter wrench, and you can see it actually bevels this direction. But as you tighten it, or as you loosen it, the strap actually tightens. So you got to make sure you get it on the right direction. Now we're going to obviously lefty-loosey, so we need to be able to turn this in this direction.
very tight for some reason, but it's loose enough now that I can finish by hand. Just gotta get this wrench out of here now. Come on, bud. There we go. Okay. This is where it's definitely going to get messy now. Yep. Once the oil starts coming, it's a good idea to just kind of stop and let it go for a bit. Now, I highly recommend that if you're looking at oil pans, look for one that has a spot to put your discarded oil filter so you can actually just put it down when you're done. Because I don't really want to drop it in the oil pan right now. I also don't know exactly what to do with it without getting oil everywhere. But that's why I got a rag. Alright, so while we're letting that kind of drip for a bit here, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the drain plug. Now, these drain plugs don't need to be crazy tight. If I remember correctly, these only go to about 8 pounds. It does not need to be very tight at all. What I usually do is I'll just kind of tighten it a little bit, just to put a little bit of pressure on it, not much. Clean it off, add the oil, run the truck for a couple of days, and then have a look. And if it's bled out a little bit, then I'll tighten it a tad more. But if it doesn't stop leaking, you know, with moderate tightness, then of course you're going to want to replace that seal. So let's finish off now by putting in the, well, not finish off, but you know what I mean. Putting in the new filter. Now, one thing you got to do with the new filter is you want to get this O-ring on the outside nice and coated in oil. So we're going to do that by just dipping it in the old oil and attempt not to get it dirty. If you make contact with any dirty part of the vehicle after coating that in oil, take it out, clean it, do it again. All right. Now it should thread on very easily, as in it doesn't require much force. If the threads aren't lined up properly, you'll know instantly because it should spin on really simple. And this one has. All right, and again, not too tight, just snug. Clean up all of the spilled oil all around, both sides, so that if you don't have the filter on properly, you can tell when there's a bit of oil down there. All right, so now it's time to add oil. Now, I gotta say, guys, I promise you, your vehicle, if it's not a Hummer H3, is probably not gonna be quite as difficult to take that oil filter off. These ones are a little tricky, just their location is kind of silly. But you know what? It's on and it's time to add oil. So I'm gonna go ahead and dump a 5-liter bottle in there, check the oil level, and adjust accordingly. All right, before you dump oil in, remember, did you tighten up the plug and did you put the oil filter in? I've done both of those, they're on video.
Now when adding oil, probably best not to go too quick, especially because the oil might not actually run down into the engine very quickly, and you may end up overflowing, and you don't want to do that. You want to try to keep things clean, right? All right, so I've gone ahead and dumped in 4 liters. I always like to leave 1 liter in the bottle and check the dipstick before adding more, because you never really know if you've got all of the oil out of the system. I mean, it could be hanging up somewhere in there, but I mean, it should all be out, but there's always going to be a coating of oil on the inside of everything as well. And because I didn't change the engine oil hot, it probably didn't all stream out as well as it could have had it been hot. So let's check the dipstick. Now, granted, it's still kind of running down and settling into the pan at the bottom. But we're going to go ahead and check it anyway and just see where it's at now. Because if it's over, well, then we got a problem. All right, so it's on the dipstick, and yeah, so it needs about 1 liter. There we go, that's the last liter. That should be good. Now, what do you do with the old oil? Well, I'm going to go ahead and pour the old oil from the oil pan into the bottle for the new oil, and I'm going to take it to a proper recycling facility. Make sure you don't dump oil out in the field or in the grass or in rocks or whatever. That's all old school. It's not great for the environment. There are companies that actually will take that oil and recycle it and reuse it. It actually gets re-refined as well. So check your local oil change places. A lot of times they'll have facilities to do that. In Canada, you can usually drop things off like that at Canadian Tire, and even some places that do car washes actually have places for old oil as well. So just check around your local area and you'll find something for sure. All right, I've let it settle now for about 5 minutes or so, and it's going to go ahead and check the oil. I think we're good now, but let's just quickly check before we put the cap on and call it done. And it's right at the full line, so it is literally perfect. So here's the thing to remember, guys. I didn't get the full 5.7 liters that they call for in the manual into there. So 0.7 liters obviously hung out somewhere in there. I just added 5 liters and it's literally perfect. So that's essentially why companies make 5-liter bottles of oil, because that's generally how much you need for most vehicles. Even smaller vehicles can take up to 4.5, 5 liters as well. So, but I hope this video helped you out. Basically, at this point, I'm just going to be putting the cap on and calling it done. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if this video helped you out at all. And again, don't forget to recycle your old oil, get rid of it properly, dispose of it properly, and yeah, till next time. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.